Welcome back to the Wellspring Early Years Virtual Parenting Workshop Series. The theme of today's parenting workshop is tricky topics. My name is Michelle, and I'll be chatting for the next 20 minutes or so about how to have difficult conversations and answer challenging questions with your children. For today's workshop, we'll start by talking about what tricky topics are. Then we'll discuss why it's important to have these conversations with our children. Next, we'll talk about tips for having these talks, and then talk about managing any emotions or anxieties brought out through these conversations. Lastly, I'll share some helpful resources for those of you that would like to learn more. As we get started, this quote from Mr. Rogers nicely sums up why we have these sorts of conversations with our children, even if they're difficult sometimes. Anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone. Mr. Rogers. So, what are tricky topics? For the purposes of our workshop today, we're using the term tricky topics to refer to conversations that might be scary, like the COVID-19 pandemic, sad, like the loss of a loved one, serious, like global warming or social justice, or uncomfortable, like puberty or sexuality. However, these topics aren't necessarily scary, sad, serious, or uncomfortable for your child. These topics may be things that you find scary or uncomfortable. Your child may be perfectly comfortable talking about these things, and that's great. However, regardless if the topics are uncomfortable or scary for you or your kiddo, it's important to be prepared to have these conversations and answer any questions your child might have. You may be thinking, if these conversations are so uncomfortable, then why do we need to have them anyways? Well, there's lots of reasons. Firstly, some scary topics are important for your child's safety. For example, explaining the importance of social distancing during the COVID-19 pandemic, or what to do in the case of a fire. These topics are super important for our children's safety, but they can still be pretty scary. Secondly, some of these topics are important for keeping your child educated and informed. You want to cultivate a safe environment for your child, where they aren't embarrassed to ask questions or explore challenging topics. Learning about their bodies, bullying, or global warming may be uncomfortable or scary for you, but it's helpful for our children to know what's happening in the world around them in order for them to make informed, age-appropriate choices, like being nice on the playground, keeping their hands to themselves, or recycling their juice boxes. Next, sometimes these sorts of conversations are important for preparing kiddos for certain things. For example, if they or their sibling are going to have surgery, or if a family member is moving away. These conversations, when had in an appropriate manner, can help prepare kids for these changes or events and encourage them to ask questions, address anxieties, and avoid bad surprises. Which brings me to the next reason, which is that whether or not you're ready to have these conversations, children are naturally curious. Kids see and hear all sorts of things in their environment, and they're like little sponges soaking up everything. This is great for their learning and development, but it also means that you might have to be prepared to answer questions about what they experience in their environment. Clearly, there are lots of important reasons for these conversations, and so it's important to have them and to have some tools in your toolkit for addressing all sorts of tricky topics. When getting ready to have these difficult conversations with your children, the first step is to prepare yourself. Nobody is expecting you to know everything on a given topic, but it's important that you take a moment to reflect on what you do know about it. If it makes you uncomfortable, how come? Many adults feel that children are too young to hear about difficult topics. Explore whether this topic really is too difficult for your individual child. All children are different, and you're the expert in your own child. Similarly, though, our children are experts in us, and they are excellent at picking up on our emotions. Having the opportunity to reflect on what you think about the topic will help you stay relaxed, which is another important part of preparing for these conversations. If we're stressed or anxious, our children will reflect that. Do your best to be calm when having these conversations so that your child is also able to be calm. The next step is the big one, actually having the conversation. With all that being said about preparing, sometimes you're not going to have the chance to prepare. Sometimes kids will launch difficult questions seemingly out of nowhere. Therefore, it's important to figure out how to field these tricky questions. When your child comes to you with a question, make sure that you really listen to what they're asking. You want to make sure that you understand their question so that you can tailor your answer to meet their needs without giving too much unnecessary or confusing information. Before you answer, it's also okay to take a moment to think about your answer, especially if the question popped up out of the blue. Take a moment to think of an answer that is open and honest, but doesn't overload your child with information. Next, make sure that you acknowledge and respect any anxieties your child is experiencing in relation to their question. Remind them that it's okay to feel scared, sad, or angry, and help them cope with these emotions. We'll talk about some strategies for that later on. Next, be prepared to answer the same question more than once. I'm sure you've experienced your kiddo asking the same questions over and over again, and that's okay. Nurture their curiosity and answer their questions when they pop up. You can always reflect back to past conversations as well. Lastly, remember that it's okay if you don't know the answer to your child's question. Nobody knows everything. It's okay to tell your child, I don't know, but how about we search for an answer together? Actually answering these sorts of questions can take some tact, but the following tips can help you answer questions honestly while also addressing anxieties and fear. Firstly, try to respond in a calm voice. Next, do your best to answer your child's question thoroughly, but without providing too much information. Too much information can sometimes be overwhelming for children and can end up provoking more fears and anxieties. Next, do your best to reassure your child so that they feel safe, while also being truthful. Focusing on things that your child can control, like playing nice with their siblings or washing their hands before eating, can help quell some of these anxieties. Next, try to give answers that provide specific, age-appropriate information. For example, for a younger child asking about coronavirus, you could explain that it's a tiny germ, so small that you can't even see it, and it can make people sick, but that everybody is working really hard to wash their hands and stay at home so that people can be nice and safe. But for an older child, you might give a bit more information and explain that it's a virus that can make people sick when they breathe it in, and that social distancing, or physical distancing, is helping to stop the spread so that less people catch the virus. You can also use this as a chance to correct any misinformation that your child has. For example, your kiddo might have heard from friends at school that playing with the child in a wheelchair will make them be in a wheelchair too. Let your child know that this is absolutely not the case, and that it's perfectly safe and even fun to play with children of all abilities. Lastly, do your best to check in with your child. See if they understand and answer any remaining questions as time goes on. However, your child may not always be the one to initiate a conversation about tricky topics. Sometimes you will have the responsibility for starting the conversation. For example, if your child is going to have surgery or moving to a new town. One of the best ways to go about initiating these conversations is to start by asking questions yourself and creating an open environment that facilitates curiosity. This quote from the About KidsHealth page at the Hospital for Sick Kids sums this concept up nicely. Parents who ask questions have kids who ask questions. Asking questions is a great way to initiate a conversation about tricky topics with your children. Ask your child what they already know, what they're curious about, and how they feel about the topic. From there, you can follow your child's lead. If they aren't interested, keep the conversation to the bare necessities, or wait until another time when they're more ready to chat. If your child has a lot of questions, work through their questions in a patient, calm, and honest way, addressing any concerns. If your child has a lot of fears, anxieties, or sadness, help them express these emotions and remind them that it's okay to feel that way. With all that being said, don't feel that the responsibility is all on you to answer every single one of your child's questions. There are lots of age-appropriate resources available to help navigate these tricky topics. Reading storybooks together about difficult topics can help translate the information to your child in a new way through characters that they can relate to. There are also many books available on grief, sadness, sickness, moving houses, and more that can be really helpful for kids. Similarly, movies, videos, and TV shows can help your kiddo gain a better understanding of certain topics. TV programs such as Peppa Pig and Sesame Street have all produced specific programming for preschoolers and school-aged children that address a range of topics from washing your hand to being sick. Remember though, These shows are best when you watch them together with your child so that you can answer their questions and enhance their learning. However, make sure that the resources that you are using are coming from reliable sources, such as children's centers, local hospitals, or the World Health Organization, and make sure that your child is receiving accurate, valid information. Lastly, singing songs, playing with toys, and pretend play are all ways that children learn about the world around them. Lots of toys and songs are available that help children see and explore different topics, such as visiting the doctor or learning about their body. And never underestimate the power of pretend play. That is how your child practices interacting with the world around them, and it can be incredibly helpful in allowing them to process tricky topics in their own way and cope with any fears or anxieties. When you have these conversations, your children might experience a range of emotions. As much as we try to speak in a calm voice and focus on what children can control, it is still normal for children to feel strong emotions in response to some tricky topics. They may be scared, they may feel sad, angry, or perhaps anxious. Managing these emotions is an important part of navigating these tricky topics. Coping with emotions is challenging, even for the most mature adults, but you can help your child manage their emotions by providing validation, giving them space to express their emotions, and providing comfort. Validating emotions makes sure children feel like they are being heard. Let them know that it is okay to feel angry, sad, or scared. Help them label and identify their emotions. Share and label your own emotions to help them feel validated. Encourage your child to express their emotions in a safe way. Maybe they need some time to play on their own, or perhaps they need help taking a calming breath. Maybe they want to talk about their emotions and what they feel like in their body. Or maybe they just need to cry a little bit. That's okay, and you can support them in expressing themselves through safe and productive avenues. Of course, it's also important to provide them with comfort. Give them time to cuddle with you, have a hug, or just chat. You are a key source of comfort for your child, and this time is no exception. Some topics are bound to cause anxieties in kiddos, and we can help mitigate these by using some of the following tips. Focus on what we and the child can do or control, rather than things that are outside of our control. Don't overdo anxiety-provoking conversations. You want to make sure that your child understands the information, such as knowing what to do in the case of a fire, but you don't want to bring these topics up so often that they become an ongoing source of anxiety. That being said, it can be helpful to check in with your child over time to see how they were feeling about the topic. They may have new emotions or questions they need help exploring. Lastly, you can help to cultivate positive thinking. Positive thinking doesn't mean that you only look on the bright side, but it means that you look at problems constructively. That being said, anxiety over certain topics can develop regardless of how hard we try. There are many strategies for managing anxiety in kids, but the CARD system for coping with fears and anxieties is a great tool to help your kiddo manage. This system was initially developed to help children deal with painful or scary medical procedures, but it has been shown to help kids cope with a range of anxieties. The C stands for comfort, the A stands for ask questions, the R stands for relax, and the D stands for distract. There's cards that you can print off online on the website linked down below, and you can fill out, or your child can fill out, what you do for comfort, distraction, relaxation. You can use these card systems to help manage these anxieties. Of course, every tricky topic and every family is unique and requires special thought and consideration. Different topics also carry different weight for each family. While these tips that we provided throughout this workshop are a great place to start, you may want to explore more tips on specific topics relevant to you and your family. There are many resources available to help parents have difficult conversations with their children. Below are some websites with lots of information on a huge variety of tricky topics. The links to each website will be in the description down below for you to check out. The first resource is the About KidsHealth page from the Hospital for Sick Children. This page has useful strategies for parents of children aging from birth to 18 years old, and it talks about topics including illness, mental health, grief and loss, anxiety, positive thinking, curiosity, sexuality, and more. Another resource is the Holland Bloorview Online Family Resource Center. This online resource has evidence-based resources, tips, and social stories on all sorts of topics, including COVID-19, racism, bullying, special needs, mental health, and more. The next resource is a very well-known book called How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen and How to Listen So Your Kids Will Talk by Adele, Faber, and Elaine Mazlich. This book is filled with tips and tricks and is available at most libraries. Another useful resource is the Triple P Parenting website. This has tricks and tips for positive parenting and provides useful information on topics such as managing disappointment and sexual health. The last general resource that we have is KidsHealth.org. This website has explicit tips for talking about the COVID-19 pandemic with children of all ages, as well as a kids' medical dictionary designed to help answer kids' medical questions. It is also important to recognize that we are living in an unprecedented time. Amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and powerful anti-racism movements occurring around the world, there are a huge number of opportunities for us to have meaningful, educational conversations with our children. To help with this, we've also identified some additional resources that specifically focus on the COVID-19 pandemic, racism, and protests. Again, all these resources will be available in the description below. Our first resource here is from the World Health Organization and their #HealthyAtHome Healthy Parenting page. This has tips and resources for managing COVID-19 with children and includes book lists and videos like Peppa Pig. The next website is sesamestreet.org. They have a really useful tip sheet on discussing the COVID-19 pandemic with young children. The next is unicef.org, Parenting for Every Child. They have age-specific tips for talking with your children about racism. PBS for Kids also provides some resources for parents and some useful age-appropriate videos for kids to help navigate the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as initiate conversations about racism and protests. It also has some tips for diversifying your child's bookshelf. The Canadian Pediatric Society has their Parenting During COVID, a New Frontier article. This article provides some reassurance for parents as well as strategies for parenting during a global pandemic. Lastly, the Autism Society has their Racism and Protest Social Stories. These stories help explain concepts such as racism and protests to young children in a way that's easy for them to understand. I'm sure there are lots of other great resources available online. So if you find any, feel free to comment them down below so that other listeners can check them out too. Thanks so much for joining us on today's Tricky Topics Parenting Workshop. Make sure you keep an eye on our YouTube channel for more videos, circle time activities, and parenting workshops like we had today. If you want, you can give this video a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button to see more videos from the Wellspring Early Years program. Make sure you check out the resources that are linked below and feel free to share any more useful resources that you've found for talking about tricky topics with your children. Thanks for watching. Bye.